So we are continuing today with our five-part sermon series entitled SOOT. How did I come up with a title like that if you weren't able to join us last week? Well, SOOT is actually a Hebrew word used in the Old Testament just 2 times in the book of Exodus, but it refers to like a powdery substance, something that can be easily puffed away. And that's kind of why I had that image of a blown-out candle, something that can be blown away, kind of like ashes or dust. Well, we also said, though, that the SOOT is an acronym we're using for this sermon series as we look at some oddities of the Old Testament. Well, what does that mean? Oddities make me strange or unique or peculiar or unusual things or people or events. So combining that kind of concept, the series purpose over these 5 weeks is to look at several Old Testament stories, look at this, that are often overlooked or kind of puffed away in the teaching and preaching due to their uniqueness or peculiarity. So it's kind of like harder to go through some of these stories. But what a blessing it is as we teach through the entirety of the Word of God. So last week we opened things up with this understanding of covenant with Abraham. We looked at Genesis chapter 15 and understanding how important it is to know how covenants, even the Bible itself, meaning the Old Covenant and New Covenant, is sprinkled throughout all of it, and our understanding of our covenants. If we happen to miss that first part of the sermon series, you're welcome to join on any of our social media platforms, Facebook or YouTube, to get caught up, or even our website to listen to the message. But we also kind of talked about one of the understandings of a covenant. Yes, it's kind of like the rules in which God has established, but in it is God's loving kindness, the Hebrew word for hesed, kind of holds it all in place. And we mentioned that in dealing with our own sin and brokenness through God's covenant, it's Jesus passes through death on our behalf. And that's what up here we see we've been celebrating Easter, the fact that even to get to the resurrection, you first have to go through the cross. And Jesus himself there paid it on our behalf and kind of referred to as our smoking fire pot. Now, if you missed last week, you don't know what that means. Go back and take a look to catch up on what that's all about. But today, here's another odd story. Balaam's, it's not a misprint, talking donkey. What is that all about? Well, moving our story down the road, let's take where we left off last week all the way in Genesis, because we're going to look in the book of Numbers today. But let's kind of talk about how we go from Abraham's time all the way up to Balaam's story. It's about a 400 or 500 year period. And you get in Genesis, and yes, God comes to Abraham and kind of starts this ball rolling of creating like these holy people that he would use. It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And look, I was just at a Bible study on Wednesday evening, and we were looking at one of the stories of Jacob, and you know what they formed there? A covenant. So again, it's kind of sprinkled throughout all that. But that lineage starts from Abraham to his son Isaac, and then to Jacob. Jacob then has 12 sons. And there's kind of, if you didn't know, the tribes of Israel kind of from the name of their sons. And one of those sons, Joseph, is actually sold into slavery by his brothers, and they end up down in Egypt. Now you're going to see, when you look at God's story, you study the Old Testament, there's a lot of ups and downs and problematic things that happen to God's people. Well, Joseph is sold into slavery, and then Joseph, while there, kind of works his way up, look at this, to second in all of command of the nation of Egypt. And during 7 years of plenty, they store up all this food down there in Egypt, and then they invite the people, his 12 brothers and their families, or the beginning of the nation of Israel, to come all the way down to Egypt, and they establish their home there. And if you didn't know, then the nation itself of Israel begins to grow and grow and grow, so much so that the people of Egypt are kind of taken aback by how well they are doing. And look at this, they're put into slavery. And they're there for many years. And then God delivers them. So it goes from this difficult survival time to a thriving time when they're delivered. Moses comes down, and through the plagues and everything, Pharaoh finally lets the people go. And they go on a 40-year journey of basically from surviving to thriving, and they end up in slavery. And then out of that slavery, they move on into and travel along and understand that this covenant was established even in the book of Exodus when they left. So Moses established this covenant with the people, but as they continue to journey for 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So as the people leave Egypt, you think, why did they just go right to the promised land? Well, if you remember some of that story, they were kind of concerned about who was living there. Instead, God sends them to 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And now we are nearing the end of this journey. We pick up our story today as a nation as they travel. And by the way, this nation of Israel, as they're going to their promised land, is conquering other nations. And this is an important thing to think about, too. If you read all the stories in the Old Testament, we often think of the wrong side of the covenant. We start to think of the stories like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the story of Moses, and we get wrapped up into the people being the right side of the equation. And if you remember what we talked about last week, when the covenant passed through or was made, it was God who passed through. He was fast asleep on the ground. And you start to realize, just like in the story we looked at then, throughout the entirety of almost the whole Old Testament, is the people are not the strength of the story. It is God who is always faithful throughout all of it. And you're going to see here in the story, today's story, and once again, the faithfulness of God. How's that in your life? Is your story about the faithfulness of God, or are you trying to do this on your own? One of the things about one of my Old Testament professors in seminary used to say, it's important when you study the Bible that you use the CIA approach. Not like you're doing some secretive investigation, but rather you clarify what the text is saying. And we're looking at a doozy today, a talking donkey. What's that all about? How do you clarify that? But then you look for insights about God. What does the story reveal about God? And from that, then, you look for an application for your life. So we are talking about the faithfulness of God throughout all the entirety of the Old Testament, and seeing it's not necessarily the people, because they're up and down and all over the place. How about your faith, by the way? Would you say your faith walk is this trajectory that you came to the Lord, now it's all the way up to God? Or do you look more like the people in the Old Testament, up and down, caught in your deception and lies and your sin? Who's faithful in your story? Just like the Old Testament, God is faithful in ours as well. So understand where we are today then, as we are having a story that takes place in the plains of Moab. Now, as I said, the people are traveling for 40 years, and they have just conquered all these people in Bashan and the Amorites. So they came up here and they start coming down this way. Who do you think's next? It's not that hard. Who's it say up there? Moab. There you go, Moabites, right. So they're coming down, and we're going to have a story that takes place in the plains of Moab concerning the Moabites. And this is where it starts, our characters today. So our first story is about our character is Balak. He is the king of Moab. And he sees, look, the two other nations right above him are destroyed by this nation of Israel. We got to get a plan together, right? You ever put a plan together when you know something bad is coming? If the hurricane's coming, or we got to get ready, get the generator working. You got to get a plan together. You want to hear what Balak's plan was? It's in Numbers chapter 22, verse 6. Look at this. He said, look, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on these people, because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. Now, Balak is talking to someone in particular, and who he's speaking to or about is a man named Balaam. And that gets to our main character today. And yes, he is a foreigner, and he is a prophet, but he's a Gentile prophet. And remember we talked about, too, a Gentile is anyone who's not part of the nation of Israel. It's a foreigner. So this is not a prophet of God's people. This is a foreigner who is a prophet, and it says this guy's good, that who he blesses is blessed, and who he curses are cursed as well. And so we get, as part of our story today, Balaam himself, then look at this, checks with God. Interesting, isn't it? Like, he wants to do this thing, and he checks with God. This is something that everyone should take note of. If you are sitting here today and you call yourself a child of God, you better be checking in with God to find out what he wants for your life. That's a problem, isn't it? You have someone here who's not even a child of God, and he's checking in. And you may be sitting here going, wait a minute, when's the last time I checked in with God? It's important for all of us to know that Balaam, who's an outside prophet, even knows to check with God. Why? Because he's about to deal with God's people. And here's what we find out in our story. Now, here's a very important part before we look at the verses. we understand Balaam asks God and seeks from him, and this is the answer he gets directly from God. And what you're about to hear here is God's perfect will for him. God says to Balaam, after he searches him, he says to Balaam, do not go with them. Do not go with the Moabites. Don't go with them. You must not put a curse on those people because they are blessed. That's the perfect will of God in this story. Now, let's understand something. After he hears that from God, you think, no problem. I'm good. I'm going to follow what the Lord says, and I'm not going to go down and do anything against those people. Well, the Moabites, feeling the pressure of them about ready to be invaded, decide to make a greater offer to Balaam about coming. And they come back a second time, and they offer him what? They reward him handsomely and do whatever Balaam says. Now, could you imagine that? A leader of a nation or a people coming to you and saying, you come to us, do what we say, you will get a ton of money and the ability to do whatever you want. Whatever you say goes. Who'd like to have that kind of power? Have like someone from our government coming to you right now and saying, you can come to the White House and everything you say goes. We will listen to you. Would our nation be in trouble if you were put in charge? So this is what they're basically offering to Balaam. How do you like that for a temptation? Unlimited riches, tons of money, and unlimited power. Who wouldn't want it? That's a temptation. And does he fall victim to it? How hard is it to refuse this offer? And I think you begin to see what happens here, because this is something that you need to understand about this. Because then he basically hears from God again, and you may see this as a contradiction. But I think instead of the perfect will of God, you get the permissive will of God. Since these men have come to summon you and offer you all kinds of power and money, you can go with them, but he also says, but do only what I tell you. And did you ever notice there's a big difference between the perfect will of God and the permissive will of God? There is a difference, in fact, if you didn't know. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever heard or read something or heard a pastor or a message that tells you not to do a certain thing? That may be the perfect will of God because it's coming right from his word, right? And then in your own life, you decide to do something different or contrary to what you just heard. That would be the permission. For whatever reason, God permits us to make our own choices. Some would say that's free will involved in all this. There is a difference between the perfect will and the permissive will of God. And we see here that Balaam has heard both. Is he going to do what the Lord really told him in God's perfect will? Or is he going to head down his own path and go with the people to make a lot of money and unlimited power? And this is where I want you to consider something. The heart of the matter is the matter of the heart. And the issue that we see Balaam dealing with today is greed. The sin of greed. Now you might be checking out and say, oh, I don't have a problem with that. I'm going to check out now. Hold on. Hold on and wait to see if the matter of your heart may just be greed today as well. Now, let's get to the talking donkey part, shall we? Are you familiar with talking animals? You see them all the time now in movies and AI. I know my wife and I like to follow this little animal on social media, Coco, and he has his own little voice, and he talks about all these things that happens in his life. Or if you watch any Disney movie, they're loaded with all kinds of animals that speak. Now, there's an older story that was on TV, too. Does anyone remember Mr. Ed? He was a talking horse. Now, only the old people now raise their hand at this point. I caught you, right? No, I do remember that one as well. But that was back in the 60s, but Mr. Ed and Wilbur Post. But this particular one has to be the Old Testament talking donkey today. We're never given the donkey's name. All we're told is it's Balaam's talking donkey. Now, don't panic. We have spent a lot of time to kind of develop or giving you a context to understand the story we're about to hear, to find your place in it. It's not going to we're not like only a quarter of the way. We're pretty far through this. But listen now to the Word of God as we read Numbers chapter 22, verses 21 through 41. If you'd like to follow along in the Pew Bibles right in front of you, you can turn to page 154. Balaam's donkey. So now you know the context. He's been offered a lot of money. Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the Moabite officials. But God was very angry when he went. Now, that's an important part to understand, right? Because if you're reading this story without understanding the perfect will of God versus the permissive will of God, you may say, well, wait a minute. He told him that he could go. But what was God's perfect will? He was telling him, don't go, don't curse these people. But then he says, well, if you have to or you want to go because you're so tempted by this, don't go, but don't say anything bad. So God's pretty upset then with what's happening here. We've been hearing a little bit about the anger of God even in Psalm 2 this morning. That's why I picked that psalm today. But God was very angry when he went. And look at this. The angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, it turned off the road into a field. Now, here comes some mistreatment of animals. Ready? Balaam beat it to get it back on the road. He's upset with his donkey. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path through the vineyards with walls on both sides. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it. So what did he do this time? So he beat the donkey again. Then the angel of the Lord moved on ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no room to turn, either to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw, hear that? When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and he was angry, and Balaam beat it with his staff. What a great reaction. Poor donkey, right? Then the Lord, then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, what have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times? Now let's talk a little bit about this, shall we? Isn't it interesting? How would you react to this? If your animal that you had, that you were even mistreating, begins to talk to you? Is Balaam shocked that the donkey speaks? Would you be shocked if the donkey, maybe we're so used to the fake stuff, but when you watch those things on AI, and yes, sometimes they're hard to tell, or you watch a Disney movie, or you watch Mr. Ed, you say to yourself, animals don't talk. Have you ever been the voice of your pet, Are you hungry? Oh, I'm hungry. Okay, but that animal's not going to really start talking. That if it did start talking, you'd be like, you'd be freaking out, right? You'd think that Balaam would respond in that way. Here's a nice quote from Adam Clark in a commentary. He said, and where is the wonder of this? If the ass had opened its own mouth and reproved the rash prophet, we might well be astonished, but when God opens the mouth, an ass can speak as well as a man. Now, ass referring to a donkey, of course. You would think. Let's see here, how does Balaam respond to this? Not shockingly, Balaam answered the donkey, you have made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? Look at his answer. No. So this is the first time the donkey is also not obeying Balaam either, and stopping and turning away. So Balaam admits, no, he said. Then look at verse 31. Look at this, what happens. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes. He opened his eyes. And then he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his sword drawn. So he bowed low and fell face down. The angel of the Lord asked him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I have come here, why? To oppose you, because your path is a reckless one before me. His path is reckless. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If it had turned away, I would certainly have killed you by now, but I would have spared it. So it would have killed Balaam, not the donkey. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, at least he recognized it then because his eyes have been opened, I have sinned. I did not realize you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now if you are displeased, I will go back. Now he's got the right heart, right? Now the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, now go with the men, but look at the same message, but speak only what I tell you. So Balaam went to Balak's officials. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him as the Moab town on the Arnon border at the edge of his territory. Balak said to Balaam, hey, did I not send you an urgent summons, with all that money offered and unlimited power? Why didn't you come to me? Am I really not able to reward you? Well, I have come to you now, Balaam replied, but I can't say whatever I please. You pick up on that? He came, but I won't say whatever I please. He says, I must speak only what God puts in my mouth. Then Balaam went with Balak to Kiriath-Huzoth. Balak sacrificed cattle and sheep and gave some to Balaam and the officials who were with him. The next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal, and from there he could see the outskirts of the Israelite camp. So this is the first time he actually sees him. Now, about that story you just heard, I will honestly admit I never heard that story growing up. All the time growing up in church, I don't remember it ever being taught in a Sunday school lesson. I don't remember ever hearing it in a sermon. So in my early 20s, when I came across this story for the first time, when I was pretty early on in my faith, I'm like, what the heck is going on here? What does this mean? What is the understanding or the importance of this message? And it hit me. And so maybe you've never heard this story too. But let's try to get to the heart of the matter. As we said already, it's greed. And let's talk about this reckless path that Balaam seemed to be on. Because did you notice, he was the one blinded by his sin of greed. Now, if he would have been able to see it, or his eyes were open right away, don't you think, if you saw an angel of the Lord with a sword in his hand in front of your path, would you not be like a donkey and go a different direction? But he's blinded by his sin. And if he didn't, as I was trying to emphasize that as I was reading it through 22, who saw the angel all three times? Balaam or the donkey? It was the donkey that was seeing him, not Balaam. And it's interesting in his response. God uses a donkey to show Balaam his blindness. And that he was so infatuated or focused on going for what? The money and the power is what he really wanted. Difference between the perfect will of God and the permissive will of God. Let's talk about the will, shall we? My will be done. Balaam is quite angry, so much so that he beats his donkey 3 different times. And he takes it out on him. And this is where we get to not talk about animal cruelty. This is not in any way you should ever do this to an animal. But who do you take it out on? What do you get angry at when your will or your way is not granted by God? Oh, now, Pastor Mark, why did you have to say that? I was better just thinking about Balaam it being his problem, not mine. Because all of us can get frustrated if we're not careful. When God gives us something in our path that we may not want, in his perfect will, we may not agree. And we may get upset or even angry that he's called us this way. You want a confession of mine? 9 weeks I've been dealing with this illness of mine. And I keep praying to God, God, I'm asking for my voice to return because I am doing what? Sharing your word. And it's all I can take at times not to get a little angry in my own heart. I don't beat my dog. I don't beat anyone in my family, but it's a little frustrating because it's not my will. But God, for whatever reason, has allowed this sickness to occur. Maybe that's your story. When your will and God's will are not the same. When he doesn't put forth, even after you pray, what you want. And his will is different than yours. Am I the only one here that feels that way? Or is there other people that ever had that happen in their life? You ever get angry when it doesn't go your way? You may start to identify better with Balaam here than you could think. And this is the thing that's challenging. And if that path is against God's will, get off of it. That's one of the things I can encourage all of you. If you are living in some sort of reckless path and disobedience from God, don't confuse the perfect will of God in your life for what he has called you for versus his permission that he allows you to keep messing in your sin. Get off that path because you're blinded by it. So what path are you on today? Is it reckless or obedient before God? That makes all the difference, doesn't it? Don't confuse his permission to allow you to dabble in your sin constantly. Don't mess this up. He may permit it, but he surely doesn't want it. He's not happy about it either. Look at the response that Balaam received by an angel standing in his way. And thankfully, the hero of the story reveals it to Balaam. And if you look at the story, he gives one message in chapter 23, 2, 3, 24, 4, 5, 6, 7 different messages to that king, Balak. And you know what he says all the time? You can't touch the people of God. They're God's people. And he has to bless God's people instead of cursing him. You know what Balaam walked away with? Nothing. He got nothing. No power, no riches. But he stepped with the point and the faithfulness of God. He recognized when his eyes were open to get rid of the sin and confessed it and knew he was going to have to say whatever the Lord commanded him to say. This, by the way, is also in the New Testament. Several other times, book of Peter, book of Revelation, they refer back to Balaam's greed. In fact, it even says that teachers, Bible teachers and preachers, can be motivated by the sin of greed too. And I would say we have to be careful and guarded against that, even in the house of God. But in all of our lives, are you on the path of greed in your life, or are you on the path of the Lord? And you may say, well, I don't have a problem with that. Let me just say something else about this message, which I really like. One of my professors in the Old Testament, when we were covering this particular, the book of Numbers, and we get to the story of Balaam, he had this great quote, and I'll share it with all of you. If God can speak through an ass, don't believe he can't speak through you. Do you get that? If you're sitting here saying, oh, God can't use me, really? Hee-haw, hee-haw. If he can speak through an ass, he can surely speak through you or me. Sorry for the language, but that's what a donkey is. And when he said that to me, I'm like, wow, meaning there is no one God can't use for his perfect will. Don't believe anything other. Let me close this story today. Because I have this story from one of the people that I really look up to. He's since passed away, Pastor Timothy Keller. I read quite a few of his books, listened to a lot of his sermons and stuff. But in his book, Counterfeit Gods, he shares this story. He said, some years ago, I was doing a 7-part series of talks on the 7 deadly sins at a men's breakfast. My wife, Kathy, told me, I'll bet that the week you deal with greed, you will have your lowest attendance. And Timothy Keller said, you're right. She was right. See, people pack the study for lust and wrath and even for pride. But nobody thinks they are greedy. Isn't that interesting? And there's probably very few people here today who, when they start hearing about this message or problem, said, I'm not greedy. Isn't that fascinating? And then Timothy Keller says, as a pastor, I have people come to me to confess that they struggle with almost every kind of sin. Then he adds one word, almost. I can't recall, Timothy Keller said, anyone ever coming to me and saying, I'm greedy. And this guy was a pastor for a number of years. I've been a pastor now, 8 years here and 3 or 4 at the other, about 12 years. You know how many people have come and confessed to me that they're greedy? Nobody. Not one person has ever confessed that to me. No one has said, I spend too much money on myself. I think my greedy lust for money is harming my family, my soul, and people all around me. Greed hides itself from the victim. And I like how this closed, and it really hit me because it ties with Balaam today. He says, the God of money's mode of operation is this. It includes the blindness to your own heart. And when I read that, I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. Who was blinded on the path to the path of the perfect will of God? It was Balaam. He couldn't see it, but it was the donkey who could see it and was trying to get his attention. So maybe today you're the donkey trying to let somebody know of their own greed, or maybe today you have the blindness in your own heart towards greed. If it's one of the 7 deadly sins, don't you think we should preach on it? Don't you think we should say it? And maybe you should ask yourself today, and I pray this for you, because you may be sitting here today saying, I don't have a problem with greed. Can you spend the next couple days or weeks asking God to reveal in your life where you might have a problem with greed? Say, God, where am I blinded in my own heart to greed in my life? And let God do his thing. Because who's this hero of the story anyway? Pastor Mark sharing a story? No. It is God who can reveal in your life any brokenness and any sin. And I pray he opens your eyes to any greed you may have in your life. Would you pray with me, please? Father, we thank you for the blessings of this day, to be challenged by your holy word from a story that is so odd, about a talking donkey. Yet it's the donkey, Lord, who clearly sees you on their path. So, Father, I pray for every person here today that on the path that they are walking on, that they are leading in their lives, that they are going in your perfect will, in obedience to you. Otherwise, O Lord, do whatever it takes to get them off the reckless path, to put them back on a path of life that comes from Jesus Christ. Open our eyes today, O God. Open our eyes today. Open our eyes that we may truly see the sin in our lives. And Father, we humbly confess that we may truly be greedy in many ways. So help us with that, O God. And we leave it today at the foot of the cross. And help us to live openly and honestly for you in your path of righteousness. And we ask all this in the precious name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.